Hello, Internet! At the time of recording, it is still Thursday, December 29th, and this is the second of the two vlogs I'm shooting today to make up for the fact I couldn't shoot on Wednesday. And while the last video was kind of heavy and a little bit depressing, and left me a bit emotionally vulnerable, I wanted this video to be something a bit more lighthearted, not so much optimistic, just something genuinely lighter in tone to kind of balance things out. Plus, it gives me an excuse to wear this t-shirt. For those of you who followed my Twitter feed for, well, the entire month of November, you may recall that I was taking part in NaNoWriMo. What NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month. It is a challenge that takes place every November, where the goal is to write a 50,000-word novel from start to finish, starting on November 1st and ending on November 30th. And I was able to hit that word count, but I was not able to actually finish the novel. So I qualified for this t-shirt, but the story is nowhere near done. More or less, I ended up writing a 50,000-word first act of a much larger story. The kind of ground that is covered with how much I've written, it's not even enough for a complete book. But what I wanted to do for this video is I wanted to share with you a scene that I wrote in this novel. It's probably my favorite scene that I've written thus far working on this story, and it's subject to change, but I kind of wanted to get an idea of how it sounded when read aloud. And yeah, if you want to give me feedback on what you think of the story, let me know in the comments below. The reason I'm not saying what the title is because the novel doesn't even have a title yet, so all I can say is it's an untitled martial arts novel. That's pretty much it. So, sit back, take a nice deep breath, as I try to channel my inner LeVar Burton. Okay, this is a little sidebar. It's going to take me multiple takes to get through this, so you know what? I'm going to simply dim the lights and cut the camera, so that way I can focus only on the audio. This is so I don't have to do any multiple long takes to try to get through this, because it is kind of long, and I want to actually be able to get this done at a decent hour, so yeah. Listen to this rough book on tape. Alright, everyone nice and comfy? Pull up a nice cup of tea or cocoa, depending on what you're into, I don't judge, and let's begin our story. Both JJ and Mr. Kelly passed through the automated revolving door and were out on the street. Mr. Kelly wore a long gray coat over his jumpsuit, a light fog escaping his nostrils with each breath. Summer was beginning to give way to autumn. They walked together until they were at the intersection where JJ could cross over to the side of the street where the fast food restaurant sat. "Well, this is where we part ways," he said with a smile. "Take it easy, kid." "Yeah," JJ replied. "You too." Mr. Kelly walked upward on the same side of the street as JJ waited for the crosswalk to signal that he could walk across. JJ pulled his hooded jacket closed. It belonged to his mother, but she let him take it to keep himself warm while he waited for her at the restaurant. As he waited, a few other people had gathered at the same crosswalk, no doubt other hospital staff getting off work. The traffic lights soon changed and the crosswalk sign began to beep to signal that pedestrians could cross safely. It had gotten dark enough that the streetlights had begun to flicker to life. Just as JJ had gotten to the other side, he felt a forceful push behind him, causing him to stagger as he found himself stumbling into the parking lot of an office plaza. As he turned to see who was behind him, he felt a number of hands grab his backpack and clothes and push him further into the plaza until they were at an area between two office buildings where there was very little light. This all happened so quickly that it wasn't until he was slammed in the wall of one of the office buildings that he could finally get a look at the people grabbing him. The first thing he noticed was a gun that was pressed to his chin. Holding the gun was none other than Alvaro, accompanied by two younger-looking cronies wearing the same kind of outfit as him, unbuttoned black plaid over a white t-shirt with black jeans and white tennis shoes. One of them, a taller, bulkier man, had his plaid shirt tied around his waist, revealing his muscular arms beneath a white tank top. The other, shorter than Alvaro, with less facial hair, had his sleeves rolled up. "You thought you could avoid me, cabron?" Alvaro said with a twisted smile, his lyrical voice giving way to a gruff, gritted one. "I know this city better than your mother knows my cock." The barrel of the gun, a 9mm semi-automatic, dug into JJ's neck as Alvaro forcefully pushed it. However, he kept his finger off of the trigger, laying it along the side of the gun. He wasn't ready to kill him. Yet. "I only let you live that night because I thought you would be smart and keep your mouth shut," said Alvaro, his mouth nearly foaming as he tried to keep himself from shouting. "Instead, I spent a dime in the tombs, all because little Juanito had to tell the truth." Keeping JJ pressed against the wall, he pulled the gun away and tucked it into his pants. He motioned to the smaller crony, who pulled out a butterfly knife and handed it to Alvaro. He flicked it open and began winding his arms back. "I hope you're ready," Alvaro said with a devious smile. "Little Caesar is waiting for you." JJ, whether due to the shock of the sudden assault, the pressure of Alvaro's hand, or the immense feeling of fear, could not scream. Part of him knew that if he did, Alvaro would simply slash his throat, but if he didn't, then he would die and no one would know. This was it, he thought. This is how he was going to die. The only thing he could think of doing was close his eyes and wait for the pain. "Haven't y'all got better things to do than threaten teenagers over 10-year-old grudges?" he heard a familiar voice chime in. JJ opened his eyes. Although it was dark, he recognized the voice and the green coat of the person it came from. It was Mr. Kelly. "I mean, really, is this what gangbangers do nowadays?" Mr. Kelly asked as he stepped from the shadows. "Kill children for ratting them out to the cops? That's pathetic. Back in my day, they had a little more teeth than that, more important things to do." As he walked closer, he noticed Alvaro twitch slightly. "Or is it that you got nothing better to do?" Mr. Kelly continued. "Did your territory get poached while you were in prison? Are these the only two you could trick into being your flunkies?" "This is none of your business!" Alvaro shouted as he pointed the knife toward Mr. Kelly. "Yeah, don't you got some cotton to pick?" the shorter crony shouted. "Already throwing in the racism, I see," Mr. Kelly said, completely unfazed. As he spoke, Mr. Kelly slowly raised his left arm up, holding his hand out in front of him, palm facing out. On his wrist, he wore a bracelet with large wooden beads that featured ornate carvings of Chinese characters. "You're also going to want to be careful where you point that," Mr. Kelly said shortly before he twisted his extended hand with a flick of his wrist, turning his palm upward in a quick motion as his hand lowered slightly, the beads clattering. "That thing can become really dangerous if you can't see straight." JJ couldn't tell if it was the shock overcoming him and making his vision blurry, but as Mr. Kelly twisted his hand, he saw the air above it distort slightly, like how the asphalt produces a slight distorted refraction on a hot summer's day. At that moment, Alvaro's grip on him loosened as he suddenly let out a cry of pain, closing his eyes in a painful wince, dropping the knife in the process. He slid down the wall, the shock of nearly dying no doubt leaving his legs weak. However, the adrenaline began to kick in, so he used what strength remained in his arms to scramble away from the three as quickly as he could. Once he was a sizable distance away, he sat on the cold asphalt, both out of exhaustion, but also out of fear of leaving Mr. Kelly to face the very death he had saved him from. Mr. Kelly tilted his head back and forth, his neck suddenly feeling a lot more loose and relaxed. The two cronies looked at their leader perplexed. The shorter one picked up the knife. "You think you're hot shit, huh?" he said as he began to run, eager to create a new hole in Mr. Kelly's body. "I sure hope you stretched, boy," Mr. Kelly said with a smile, pushing out his right hand and pulling his left hand back. "You wouldn't want to cramp up now, would you?" JJ saw it again, the brief refraction in the air around his hand. It distorted the air in front of his palm before disappearing. The shorter crony suddenly fell mid-stride, letting out a cry of pain before he landed face first onto the asphalt. He then quickly rolled over and began massaging his calf muscle, which seemed to tense up to the same firmness as an overinflated balloon. Mr. Kelly casually shook his arms and legs out. "Now that's a lot better," he said with relief. "Been having to hold that one in for a good week or so." The larger, muscular crony looked at both his leader and his comrade as they writhed in pain. He then began walking up to Mr. Kelly, popping his knuckles. "No need to rush. I got plenty for everybody," said Mr. Kelly. "Tell me, do you ever eat before exercising? I hear that's a really bad idea." As he spoke, Mr. Kelly stepped forward with his right leg, bending it to almost a 90-degree angle while leaving his left leg straight behind him. As he did this, he brought both hands together, opening them up as he went down into the full bend of his front leg, pushing his hands out in front of him to full extension. Once again, JJ saw the refraction in the air, this time more noticeable as it surrounded his hands before disappearing just as quickly. The muscular crony also stopped mid-stride and began clutching his stomach. His voice began to gurgle and he soon ran to the wall of the office building, bracing himself as he began to heave even though nothing was coming out save for traces of bile. Mr. Kelly stepped out of his stance and pat his belly. "Let me tell you, try eating solid food when you're holding that in your stomach," he said with a hearty chuckle. "It's not fun, let me tell you." He continued walking until he was between the three of them equally. "Y'all really need to start taking better care of yourselves, you know," he said sarcastically as he began gesturing to the three of them individually, first to Alvaro, then the shorter crony. "Maybe cut back on the caffeine, drink more water, and you?" He struggled for a suggestion to give the larger crony. "Maybe less red meat," he said with a shrug. "I mean, I'm with you, it's delicious, but too much of that stuff will wreak havoc on your colon, let me tell you." Alvaro's eyes shot open as the pain suddenly passed. At the same time, the pain left the shorter crony's legs and the larger crony's stomach settled down as though it were never upset. "Carajo estás esperando?" Alvaro shouted at his cohorts. "Get him!" "Well, I tried to go easy on you," Mr. Kelly said with a hint of sarcastic disappointment. As he spoke, he slowly raised his arms behind him, circling upward before lowering them in front of his body. His right hand extended far from his body with the fingertips at eye level. His left hand held closer to his body, level with his heart, both palms facing outward. At the same time, he bent his knees, sliding his right foot forward, keeping his weight on his back leg. "What happens next is all on you," he added as he settled into his stance. The shorter crony was first to his feet, grabbing the knife and running towards him. Mr. Kelly spun to the outside of the thrusting arm, catching the wrist and pulling the arm backward behind the crony, loosening his grip on the knife. "I'll be taking that, thank you," he said as he pulled the knife away with his free hand. He then released his grip on the crony and struck in between his shoulder blades with an open palm strike, the force sending the crony falling forward at high speed. He then folded the butterfly knife closed and tucked it into the pocket of his green coat. The larger crony charged next, winding up for a haymaker. Blocking to the outside, Mr. Kelly struck the crony's elbow with his wrist and forearm, blocking the punch. As the crony prepared to swing the other arm, he struck the elbow with the heel of his palm, intercepting the strike. The crony continued trying to throw punch after punch, leading to a repetitive back and forth of punch, block, all while Mr. Kelly stayed on the inside as he backed up slowly. The crony then swung both arms in an attempt to grab him, but was blocked as Mr. Kelly threw both arms outward, striking both elbows at once. He then immediately followed with a swift series of kicks, first striking the rear knee, forcing the leg back. Then, using the same foot, he struck the front knee, pulling the crony forward and leaving him off balance. He then finished by kicking straight up into the groin while at the same time sliding both of his arms downward, striking the crony's ears, forcing air into the eardrums with a loud clap. As the crony was dazed, he then spun around his arms and also struck in between the shoulder blades, sweeping the back foot as he fell forward. He then spun around to face Alvaro, who was still bracing himself against the wall. "So, are you going to join in the fun, or do you always let your flunkies do the dirty work?" Mr. Kelly said with a confident smile, his low voice giving way to an even more energetic timbre. Alvaro looked up at Mr. Kelly, an intense ferocity in his eyes. He then looked down towards the gun. Mr. Kelly followed his eyes to the gun and then looked back at Alvaro, the two of them locking eyes. The air grew still. JJ could only watch as the two men engaged in what was more or less a one-sided quick-draw duel. Would Alvaro get to the gun first, or did Mr. Kelly have something up his sleeve? Alvaro panted, like a rabid dog waiting to close in for the kill, whereas Mr. Kelly was calm, relaxed, even smiling. He dared him to try to go for it, taunting him like a bullfighter with a red cape. Alvaro was merely tapping his hoof in anticipation. Suddenly, a number of lights and a siren could be heard from the street. It was the familiar red and blue of the Strong Mill Police Department. Like the dropping of a handkerchief in a pistol duel, the arrival of the police signaled the start of the duel. Alvaro pushed off the wall and dropped down to reach for the gun. At the same time, Mr. Kelly's wrists twitched, the air distorting once again. This time, though, JJ was able to follow the distortion as it traveled through the air and disappeared as it made contact with Alvaro's body. Suddenly, the hand that was reaching for the gun tensed up, the wrist bending inward, the fingers curling up completely. Then the arm followed, the elbow bending fully to bring the hand to his chest, the shoulder raising so that it could almost touch his ear. The sudden contortion caused Alvaro to lose his balance, and he fell to the ground, rolling onto his side as he screamed in pain. Mr. Kelly then stood straight and raised his hands in the air, Almost immediately afterwards, a pair of police officers, one clearly a rookie shadowing a senior officer, ran onto the scene, guns drawn but pointed upwards. "Police!" the rookie shouted as he lowered his gun and pointed it at Mr. Kelly, but still kept his finger off the trigger. The senior officer kept his gun pointed up, but upon seeing the three gangsters on the ground and Kelly standing with his hands up, motioned to the rookie to holster his weapon, holstering his own shortly thereafter. "Mind telling us what happened here?" the officer asked in a calm but stern voice. "These three gentlemen were accosting the young man over there," Mr. Kelly started, keeping his hands raised but slowly pointing towards JJ with his thumb. "I happened to be nearby and managed to intervene before they could kill him. I was the person who called into your dispatch office using my phone." The rookie officer looked down the alleyway, making eye contact with JJ. He then nodded to his superior in confirmation. "You can lower your hands," the senior officer said, somewhat annoyed. "You'll have to forgive me if I tend to be overly cautious when dealing with law enforcement," said Mr. Kelly, still keeping his hands raised. "Full disclosure, there is a butterfly knife in the outer pocket of my coat. I took it from one of these individuals and placed it inside so it could no longer be used. If your partner would like to retrieve it, he is welcome to." The rookie police officer immediately walked up to Mr. Kelly, reaching into the coat pocket and removing the butterfly knife. He held it up to his superior before turning back to Mr. Kelly. "We'll be holding on to this," the rookie cop said with an undeserved sense of superiority. "By all means. It's not mine anyway," Mr. Kelly replied. The senior officer looked down towards JJ. "Are you all right?" JJ couldn't answer. His heart was still beating so quickly, his breath quick and shallow, almost to the point of hyperventilation. "He's still coming down from the shock," said Mr. Kelly. "You may want to have an EMT look at him." "And how do you know he's in shock?" the rookie cop chimed in. "I work in the hospital across the street," said Mr. Kelly. "I've seen it before." "Hey, quit grilling him and call in a bus," the senior officer ordered. The rookie glared at Mr. Kelly as he slowly walked back towards the squad car to call for an ambulance. All the while, Mr. Kelly kept his arms raised and still. Meanwhile, the senior officer walked over to JJ. "It's all right, kid. I'm not going to hurt you," he said reassuringly. "Can you stand?" JJ nodded as he struggled to get his breath under control. He then grabbed the officer's hand and slowly stood up. And that's the scene. It was my favorite to write because that was the scene I had seen most vividly in my head when I was working on this novel, and I like the way I kind of created the personality and the characters through the action. And, well, I'm definitely going to try to revise and refine this novel and hopefully get it to a point where I can actually get it out to the public in a state that is actually presentable. But what did you guys think of this scene? Do you have any feedback? Anything I could fix? Anything I could improve? Let me know in the comments below. With that, that's the end of this year-end vlog for 2017. Let's see, this is the third one, so that would mean there should be 2 or 3 more videos remaining. So, on that note, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next time.